I'm Jerry Craig with the Vet Voice. On behalf of Veterans for America First and Legacy PAC, I have the pleasure of speaking with Chris Smith, who is a candidate for the South Carolina Senate, District 26 this year. So, Chris, thank you for coming on the show. We are endorsing you from the Georgia Veterans for Trump, Veterans for America First group. We know you're an America First candidate. We know you have the right spirit, the right policy, and the right platforms to do what needs to be done for the citizens of South Carolina. So please explain to the audience who you are, what your motivation is, what your background is, and what you want to do once you get into office.
Well, my background has always, been interested in the political stuff, but more than that, more from the spiritual side. I am the regional coordinator for the National Day of Prayer right now, and that is a volunteer position that I have done for 18 years. But what that led to was me going into that state house and praying. And then I got to meet some of the legislators, and then more of them, and more of them, and then the senators, and then you begin to see what's actually going on in our state house, and it made me sick. And then I began to really follow over the abortion issue was the big thing in 2016, and realized that what my senator was saying and how he voted were polar opposites, and that the greatest political lie ever told in this state was told 48 years ago. Nikki Setzler running as a Democrat, but he's really a Republican.
That's
and people,
incumbent.
yeah, and people still believe that lie today. And so I began to call it out. No, he's not. This is how he votes on issues. And that's when I would learn it is much easier to fool somebody than it is to convince them they've been fooled. Even when you show them the facts of this is how the man voted, they still want to believe the lie. So in 2018, I had the urging to run for that seat. And so in 2020, January of 2020, I called a group of pastors, Stephen and others together, and told them what was coming. And they all, with this statement, tell me don't do this. And they said, Chris, we can't. We all call you to find out what's going on in that state house and who to vote for. And well, thanks a lot, guys. And so I started the journey, and I began to work, and I began to reach out. Well, I've spent the last 30 years working for a ministry called Promise Keepers. We brought Tony Evans into South Carolina many times. The National Day of Prayer, Easter Sunrise 2000. Well, I've spent 30 years keeping my name out of stuff. So when I began to tell people who I was and what I had done, they're going, so you're the guy that was behind all this. We always wondered. We could never figure out who was behind it, but it was you. And I said, yep. And they said, how did you keep your name out of this stuff? And I said, well, it was by design. It was never about me. So I'm very uncomfortable because now I'm running a campaign that has to be about me. And so I knocked on doors. I made phone calls. I went to gatherings. And you remember in 2020, we're in a pandemic. And the only place people are meeting are restaurants. And I'd go into a restaurant, walk from table to table, and put down my card and introduce myself and tell them I'm Chris Smith. I'm running for state senate. I appreciate your vote. And apparently that worked. And then I began to knock on doors and began to work. But you hit the most valuable lesson that I did learn about the run in 2020 is that hard work alone doesn't win elections. You have to have money. And so that's what I'm doing now is fundraising. And I've raised about $25,000. I announced last Tuesday night. And at that announcement, I had the Secretary of State that was there. I had the Senate Majority Leader. I had 2 senators and 3 House members that were there to support me. And I could have tripled or quadrupled those numbers. And had about 300 people in attendance, and was just unbelievably grateful to have their help, their support that night. So that's the big issue right there, is convincing people Nikki Setzler is not who he says he is. Now, I got 5,000 more votes than anybody that's ever run against him, spending 14,000. He spent 220,000. And I had a ball doing it because I love people. But I want our government fixed. We have real issues down there. And the common thread that ran through the messages from those senators and House members last Tuesday night was we need help. We are getting outvoted and we need help. and Chris Smith is that help. Now, in the past, the House would pass good legislation only to water it down before it went over to the Senate in hopes of getting it through. Well, 2 years ago, they quit doing that at my urging. Stop doing that. Send it over there. Let them destroy it. Let them do it. We want to watch it. And that's what has happened. We have seen one train wreck after another dumpster fire in that Senate chamber over the abortion issue, over the parental rights bill. And that was the big thing because all the school teachers love my Democratic opponent. They love him. But they got to watch him in action over that bill. And it included teachers' pay raises and things that would have made their job easier, as well as mostly protecting the parents so that when they get up at a school board meeting and voice their concerns over their children's education, that they wouldn't be labeled as a domestic terrorist.
One thing that you hit on is that it seems like everything starts between the children and the parents, and we have local issues that are becoming paramount. And what we're seeing is more and more issues like the abortion issue being deferred to the state by the Dobbs opinion, and people getting more involved with their kids' education. It's noble that there's nothing subsidiary about a state office versus a federal office. Pursuant to the 10th Amendment, the majority of control of the government should be at the state level. So you're right to have your thumb on the pulse. Also to identify the old guard, people who have been in office for, like your opponent, been in for 48 years. Well, if it's broke, you know who broke it. If it's broke, it needs to be fixed. So, Chris, I think you're right to step in, identify it, because otherwise, if you don't shed light on the way the sausage is made, people are going to believe the lie, as you said, instead of being convinced someone is a liar.
Right. So, you know, that's been kind of my message over the last 3 years. And I'm in that state house and I'm pushing a conservative agenda down there and really grateful for the influence that I've been given. And so we have issues that we have to deal with. And you hit on a very important one right there. And that is, it's a states' rights issue. Now, I told our attorney general probably 20 years ago that if anybody ever filed a lawsuit against the Supreme Court over Roe Wade about the validity of them even hearing that case, I believe we could win. That was a states' rights issue. It was not a federal issue, and they should have never heard that case. They should have directed it back to the state. And that's exactly what they just ruled 20 years later. Now, I'm not an attorney. I'm not that smart, but I saw that. And so much of what we have been doing in South Carolina is in circumvention of what they're doing on the federal level. And, you know, if Joe Biden wakes up in the morning and says, you know, I think that let's go get all the guns. Let's go confiscate all the guns. He puts out an executive order. Well, South Carolina is now a Second Amendment sanctuary state. It would be illegal today for any law enforcement agency to participate or allow that to take place in South Carolina.
You missed the point on one thing. You said when Joe Biden wakes up in the morning. I don't think he gets up before noon.
Well, yeah, that was a figure of speech, but now we're at a more critical issue, and that is our state budget. It is estimated that 60% of the budget in South Carolina is derived from federal funds. Now, how does the federal control the state? Well, let's take that example. Let's say that, you know, next month our treasurer Curtis Loftus, who's a friend of mine, is balancing his books and realizes that we haven't received our federal stipend for the quarter. So he calls our governor, Governor McMaster, and says, Henry, we don't have our money from the federal government yet. You mind calling Joe and see what's up? And Joe gets on the phone and Henry says, you know, Joe, we hadn't got our money yet. And Joe ruffles some papers around and comes back on the phone and says, well, apparently, Henry, we haven't got your guns yet. Okay, now what happens? And so I would very much like for us to stop this tax and spend directive that we have been given and get back to a balanced budget on what can we do in South Carolina, how much money are we going to collect? And then anything above that that we might get from the federal government, and I think that needs to cut off since we're what, $31 trillion in debt on the federal level right now. We'll never pay that back. You know, I think it's time to do some budget trimming. And so, you know, let's get the budget balanced, which, I mean, we're in a very fiscally conservative state. I will say that.
Well, one thing that I bring up with balanced budgets, it's only a governmental budget that isn't balanced. In your household, I'm guessing every budget's balanced. In my household, in my life, every budget's balanced. And the government doesn't have to do that. It seems like a misnomer or a paradoxical statement to say you must have a balanced budget, or it's redundant actually.
Right.
But aside of the balanced budget, a lot of the swing voters that are abandoned by the Democratic Party, or the independent people who just can't toe the line with all the liberal leftist nonsense, they're focused on less economic issues. And they're focused on a little bit more social issues and things along those lines. And I'm not trying to diminish your angle on a balanced budget. That's a core issue. That's a framework. Right. But what other issues are on your platform that you think may appeal to the swing voter or the new voter, or those that feel abandoned by the current Marxist, leftist, fascist agendas that we're seeing come out of DC and I won't, it's exhaustive to name all the places, but what issues do you have that may appeal to those middle of the road voters?
Well, number one, I am a true conservative. I have a long history of service in this state, in this region of South Carolina, and in this district. And I've been involved in the community. I've been working, trying to help and make things better. I don't just talk the talk. I have been walking the walk. My campaign promise in 2020 was I would be your voice in that state house. And I have fulfilled that promise 2 to 3 days a week, every week that they're in session. And I have testified before several Senate and House subcommittees on the issues I believe to be important to the conservative voter in our district and in South Carolina for that matter. And we're gaining traction. South Carolina is rated as the most liberal Republican state in the country. That is outrageous to me. Why? Well, there's a lot of reasons why. But people, like you said a minute ago, are beginning to pay attention to, wait a minute, I hear what they're saying, but I also see how they vote. And that's not adding up. Now, on the Senate side, it's really hard to see how they vote unless you're down there paying attention, or you go into the Senate journals and look it up. And but I'm down there. I see how they vote. I see what goes on behind closed doors. I see what goes on in these subcommittees. And the guys are right. They need help. The bedrock of the conservatives, both in the House and the Senate for that matter, need help. They're getting outvoted.
One thing that I want to ensure is when we endorse a candidate, we want to make sure that the voters know who they are. One, what their character is, what they're made of, what their thinking process, what their demeanor, what their preferences, and their religion and their core value systems. And also, if you're functionally capable of doing the job. There's so many candidates to run for office that are not qualified. There's so many people sitting in office who are not qualified. It sounds like you won't need any on-the-job training. You're already there. You're already doing the work. You're doing it as a volunteer. You're stepping in. You've been putting in the hours. You've been putting in the time and the shoe leather. Get there. It sounds like the natural next step is for you to actually have the authority to vote for District 26 in South Carolina. So I am happy to endorse you in your campaign. I want people in South Carolina to know how to get in touch with you, to donate their hard-earned money, your campaign, so you can preserve their rights. Also, how they can volunteer their time and how people can find out more information from you. So if someone wanted to vote, or someone that was a voter is trying to figure out information, or donate time or money, how would they go about doing that?
Well, number one, call me on my cell phone. It is 888-422-6337. And I will always be available. If I don't answer your call, I will return it very quickly. I have a Facebook page, Chris Smith for Senate 26, and I have a website, same address, Chris Smith for Senate 26.com. So I'm very responsive to the people that are out there and very much look forward to talking to people. Like I say, I love people. I'm a 30-year member, a 30-plus-year member of Trinity Baptist Church in Casey. State director for a ministry called Promise Keepers in the 90s, brought Tony Evans to the football stadium there many times, did Easter Sunrise 2000 at the stadium, and the last 18 years been the regional coordinator for the National Day of Prayer. And I hold the State House prayer event every year where we will have 10 to 12 interdenominational and interracial pastors that come together and pray for our government, for our state, for our nation, and our schools and different things. And very proud of what we've been able to accomplish with that. But understand this, every bit of what I just told you was done as a volunteer. I've never received a penny for any of it. I worked a full-time job. I am retired from what is now American Airlines, but I started out in Atlanta with Piedmont Airlines back in 1979 that turned into US Air. And so I am a residential builder. I don't use that license any longer. And I'm a real estate broker, and I don't use that license anymore either, but I still hold it. So,
Chris, it is a breath of fresh air that someone like you is willing to jump off the sidelines. But it sounds like you've been on the sidelines, close to the field of play for quite a while. So I am proud to endorse you. I know that I'm one of many endorsements that you are going to have and need, and we're going to support you. I want you to keep in touch with us
yes,
and
sir.
keep us up to, if there's something we can do to help you out in South Carolina, the national level, or possibly invite you to some other forums with other candidates like mine for brainstorming or otherwise. Let me know, because I'm all about assisting the America First Agenda candidates as much as we can. So thank you very much, and it was a pleasure speaking with you today.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Jared, for having me today. And one more thing that I am really proud of, and that is after the 2020 election cycle, I worked very hard with and had a pretty big voice in what is now our election integrity law in South Carolina. So I'm pretty proud of that, although it doesn't go far enough. It went as far as we could go with what we could prove for today. So know that I'll never stop working on election integrity. Your vote matters, and every person that is legal to vote should be able to. But we're not trying to make it harder to vote. We're trying to make it more difficult to cheat. And that's
Right.
the big issue right there. I worked in Georgia after the 2020 election for about 2 months on Stop the Steal, by the way. And went to an event down in Savannah representing both the state of Georgia and the state of South Carolina. And so I'm very proud to have done that. And so I am an America First candidate.
That is an issue near and dear to my heart. I am focused on the paper please, getting rid of Dominion machines effort. And we didn't go into that today, but stay tuned to what I'm doing, because I'm one of many fighting at every possible angle to get our voting and our system and everything transparent and trustworthy. So
Yes.
I think that's a good transition as a part two. So let's do this again.
I'd love it.
Between now and the primary, let me know, and we'll stay in touch.
Hey, thank you, Jared. Have a blessed day, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris.
Bye-bye.